Who Made Who is not an AC/DC album as such. It's not really even the greatest hit. Some people have tried to describe it, oh, it's a compilation. It's a soundtrack album. What happened was Stephen King, the great horror author, whose favourite band are AC/DC, who bought a radio station in New England and then converted it to playing AC/DC all the time, because that's how much of a fan he is, got the commission to do a movie called Maximum Overdrive. And he had this dream, this vision of getting his favourite band to do the soundtrack. AC/DC agreed.
It had two incidental pieces of music, which were just instrumentals, which were basic riffs. I'm sure they kind of like went, what have we got? I'll give them that. It's got a couple of the best known Brian tunes. And strangely, I think it has Sink the Pink on it from Fly on the Wall, which I don't know. And it's got Ride On from Bonzo, which is a just sublime piece of blues that a lot of people would be, would think AC/DC incapable of playing. But I mean, what it did have, of course, was the huge hit, Who Made Who?
The title track, Who Made Who, again, it was a pop song. It was a great pop song. It had a good hook to it. It's a little bit more of a modern sound. They definitely some sort of attempt to move with the times. But the track itself, it was a catchy song, so people remembered it. It had quite a powerful video with it, and it worked. There was some sense you felt that they were getting themselves back on the right track again.
Both Chase the Ace and DT, the instrumentals, stand up very well. They're very good in their own right. And Who Made Who as a song is an AC/DC classic. It's one of the strongest songs they've ever written during the Brian Johnson era. So no, it's not a compilation. It's not a greatest hits. It's not a new album. It's a soundtrack album.
Blow Up Video is a very disappointing AC/DC album. It's probably second only to Fly on the Wall as the worst AC/DC album. It didn't sound so bad at the time. I think, personally speaking, that was the first time I'd interviewed Angus Young, so of course I got very excited and probably played the album more due to the thrill of meeting my hero than actually thinking the record was any good.
Blow Up Your Video was the end of an era because this was the last album that Simon Wright was to be drumming on, and also the last album Brian Johnson wrote any lyrics for, before we moved into the Angus and Malcolm Young era of writing all the songs. There are moments on Blow Up Your Video which are quite good. Heatseeker's a very strong song.
Blow Up Your Video was very much a return to form on the back of Fly on the Wall. It's not a great AC/DC album by a long shot, but Heatseeker was an enormous hit. It's quite a good record. Terrible sleeve, awful album sleeve, I think.
Again, it suffers from the same problems AC/DC tended to be in at the time in the 80s, in a rut, whereby they had a couple of good songs on a record. The rest of it was fairly mundane and ordinary, and no one really cared.
How many AC/DC fans can sing 4 out of 5? Can sing 4 or 5 tracks off that album? No one can. I bet you AC/DC don't even know how they go.
There was a period after sort of Blow Up Your Video and before the Razor's Edge, which was a bit of an unstable time for AC/DC. I mean, Simon Wright left and was replaced by Chris Slade, who was a very well-respected session drummer. He'd been in Manfred Mann's Earth Band and Uriah Heep, but I think he was known better as a session guy. But there's also the period where, around this time, Malcolm Young had to sort of step off a tour. He basically sat out an AC/DC tour, supposedly due to booze problems.
To everybody's surprise, except maybe people on the inside, he had a serious alcohol problem. He had to stop touring, and they got in their cousin, Stevie Young, had been in a band called the Starjets way back in the early 80s, a very AC/DC style of band, to replace him for part of their American tour. Malcolm literally had to leave the band in order to clean out. That's how bad things had got. And I think a lot of people were quite amazed to see the fact that Malcolm Young had an alcohol problem, let alone the fact that AC/DC were admitting he had an alcohol problem. So they had all these things going on. And I think there may have been a stage at that point where people wondered, are AC/DC going to carry on?
AC/DC did rally around the time Chris Slade came in and made what is their best album of a pretty troubled second half of the 80s, which is The Razor's Edge, which, okay, their best album, it's only got 3 good tracks on it, but there's still 3 tracks that are much better than anything else that came after For Those About to Rock.
I think Razor's Edge is a bit of a disappointment. I really don't like the album. I think the problem with Razor's Edge is it doesn't actually focus itself at any point. It has moments when it nearly cuts through Razor's Edge, sorry, bad pun, But to me, it's another one of those plodding albums that people just shrug their shoulders and say, oh, okay, whatever, next.
The Razor's Edge was AC/DC's comeback album, if you like. I mean, they got Bruce Fairbairn in to produce it. He produced Bon Jovi and Aerosmith.
Good producer, but I mean, you don't really want AC/DC working with somebody who works with Aerosmith and Bon Jovi.
Bruce Fairbairn, his production, I mean, he's known for the more commercial end of the rock. So he came as a surprise when it was announced that he was going to do the Razor's Edge. Didn't know quite how it was going to work.
The sound can never change. They never do. They're not going to get keyboards in or start doing ballads. You know, an AC/DC song has to fulfil certain criteria, so it makes it quite restrictive. So I think what they do is they do get a producer in, different producers every so often, just to try and bring something new to the table.
It's the most commercial sounding AC/DC album ever, but it's not throwaway commercial, because I mean it got them right back to the top of the charts. It worked. It was a gamble that worked.
Their band just sounded a little bit more vital than they had done for a while, a little bit more alive. It was a fresher sound. And again, great hooks, great choruses, the riffs were there. Again, the band sounded like a little bit more rejuvenated. The Imagine If You titled live album came out in '92. I'm surprised they hadn't done that sooner, because it was a perfect document for Brian Johnson's time in the band.
Live is a worthy album. I mean, it sums up what an AC/DC show was like with Brian, and so that's all good. But obviously, it's inevitably going to be compared to If You Want Blood, which is one of the greatest live albums ever released.
It's not comparable to If You Want Blood, because Bon Scott's not there. And If You Want Blood is a magical live album. It's my favourite live album. I think it's absolutely astounding. They could never match that. They were playing to bigger audiences for the AC/DC live album as compared to If You Want Blood, and it's a longer record, and it's got its great moments. Most of the great moments come from the early part of the Brian Johnson era, those songs. But it's a very good performance. It's what AC/DC do best, which is still they perform very well live. So it comes across rather well.
Their big forte was always on stage, ultimately, and the best AC/DC records were the ones that captured the essence of what they were on stage anyway. So any AC/DC live album is always going to be good.
For me as a fan, it's nowhere near as good as If You Want Blood, because it sounds like a younger, fresher band than the Bon Scott years. Also, you only had two sides of vinyl. You didn't necessarily get the whole concert, so you just had the kind of edited highlights. And also, listening to Johnson doing some of the Bon Scott numbers, especially things like Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap and TNT, you do realise that he does, to be honest, sound a little uncomfortable at that stage. And you can't really blame him, because he'd been in the band at that point for over 10 years. And he was still singing the Dead Guys songs, and probably felt that, why was he still doing it? He's expected to do it, but you realise even now you still couldn't help compare his performance to Bon Scott's.
AC/DC are still one of the biggest rock bands in the world. They have kept a very, very big audience. And not just that, like the Rolling Stones, they crossed over from just hard rock fans or rock fans into fans in general. People who are not necessarily fans of rock music will go and see AC/DC because it's a great night out, because they know what they're going to get. And that's also one of the secrets of AC/DC. You know what you're going to get. No surprises, no fillers, straight ahead, down the line, classic rock and roll. From a band who deliver it better than almost anyone else in the world.